In the early days of the internet, most people didn't have access to it all the time. You kind of checked into it on it once a week or so. This is in kind of mid 90s. And so they treated it like the billboard at the local grocery store, where you've seen the signs, guitar lessons, first one's free, take a number, where people would post an ad on essentially a billboard online, and their username was their email address, because there was no such thing as spam yet. And at the time I was in college and I was playing in bands and managing bands. And so I noticed that people started trading bootleg concert tapes of the Dave Matthews Band in Birmingham. So I now know your email address. I know you like Dave Matthews Band and probably bands that sound like that. I've really ranged quite a bit from those, two people in a garage startups to multi-billion, multinational corporations. A big sort of inflection point in my career was, Ad Age magazine named me a marketing technology trailblazer in 2017. So I was one of the top 25 people in the world at using data and technology for marketing. Mm-hmm. The MarTech conference publishes this landscape of all the companies in the marketing technology ad tech space. When they first started putting it out in the early 2010s, had like 150 companies on it. Last year, there were over 10,000 companies on that landscape. I realized that they weren't chasing these growth hacks. They weren't trying to outsmart the algorithm. Instead, they're really building systems and processes founded in strategy. And that was the key to real success and real growth for them. Once you know your process, you can bring in the tools that accelerate it. Mm-hmm. But oftentimes people get enamored with this tool that makes this promise, and then they try to build a process around that. We have a phrase that, B2B systems set you free. Because a lot of people think, if I have all this overhead process, it's going to be restrictive. But it actually is very freeing, because it ensures that you always show up as your best self. Before we go out and start doing stuff with average messaging, first we make the messaging really powerful. That's that strategy piece.
Welcome back to Prospecting Pros. And on today's show, we have Mark Osborne. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me, John. I'm excited to be here.
So the way I like to start every show is I want you to do a little bit of a deep dive into your background, some of the past roles you've held, and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So interestingly, I'm going to date myself a little bit because I'm going to go back to the beginning of the internet. In the early days of the internet, people might not know this that are a little bit younger. Most people didn't have access to it all the time. You kind of checked into it on it once a week or so. This is in kind of mid 90s. And so they treated it like the billboard at the local grocery store, where you've seen the signs, guitar lessons, first one's free, take a number, where people would post an ad on essentially a billboard online, and their username was their email address, because there was no such thing as spam yet. You wanted them to know people to know how to get in touch with you. And at the time I was in college and I was playing in bands and managing bands. And so I noticed that people started trading bootleg concert tapes of the Dave Matthews Band in Birmingham. So I now know your email address. I know you like Dave Matthews Band and probably bands that sound like that. And I know you live somewhere near Birmingham, Alabama. So I started building databases of people that were fans of different genres that lived in different areas, and then sending an email when one of the bands that I played in or managed went to that area. And so we were selling out concerts for little unknown artists, which led to a job at a record label, which led to a job at a radio station. And actually I rose up in the radio industry. I was managing a top 10 station in a top 10 market for the largest broadcaster in America, managing a 8-figure sales budget and a team of 15 people. But I realized that broadcast was way too slow at adapting to the technology that was creating these one-to-one relationships at scale, the things that had really gotten me passionate about marketing early on. So I left, went to a little, 2 guys in a garage startup doing SEO and pay-per-click, and sort of helped them grow and build their systems. Went and got my MBA, focused on marketing analytics, sort of deeper analysis. Worked for one of the first companies to put ads on Instagram, worked for a company building analytical solutions in marketing, doing sales for them, and actually helped, deliver and develop programs for Nike and Hulu and General Motors and some of the biggest brands in the world at putting these, marketing and sales systems together. But then I had another sort of realization, which was that mid-size, sort of smaller companies deserved the same sort of level of expertise that larger companies had used. And so I founded my current company, Modern Revenue Strategies, specifically to focus on helping companies grow from kind of 1 million to 20 million, and working as an outsourced chief revenue officer for those folks, and bringing those same ideas to bear for them.
Based on what you were talking about when you were talking about dating yourself, is that back to like the AOL dial-up days up until now? Like, walk me through how long is this career stretch of yours?
So that was 96. I graduated in college in 96, and that's when I started my first business.
And so I imagine you've worked at several different companies, all shapes and sizes. Is there a bit of a specialty? Is it more startup focused or mid-sized companies or enterprise? Where do you have the most experience?
I've really ranged quite a bit from those, two people in a garage startups to multi-billion multinational corporations. And what I have found is the places where I tend to excel are the ones that are faster moving, whether it's just in the mindset or they're actually in sort of a hyper growth phase. And so that tends to be who I focus on now in my own practice.
Based on what you said earlier with the broadcast companies moving too slow, I guess that makes sense. You like it when it's moving a lot faster. And with all the technology and everything today, everything's moving very fast with AI and the different tools. And there's always a new competitor and a new workflow and new ways, and new innovative ways to get the job done.
I have found, though, that's an interesting point that you bring up, and a big sort of inflection point in my career was, Ad Age magazine named me a marketing technology trailblazer in 2017. So I was one of the top 25 people in the world at using data and technology for marketing, according to them. And I really prided myself on being the first to embrace new tools and new solutions and new sources of data and new technology and all those things. And I realized, though, that the pace of innovation has just gotten impossible to keep up with. The MarTech conference publishes this landscape of all the companies in the marketing technology ad tech space. When they first started putting it out in the early 2010s, had like 150 companies on it. Last year, there were over 10,000 companies on that landscape. So it's really impossible to keep up with that pace of change. Simultaneously, there's a whole generation of marketers that their entire career has been just being the first to embrace new technology. They were the first ones to optimize their website for search engines. So they got a windfall of traffic once consumers moved to, by using search engines. And same thing with, pay-per-click ads, and the same thing with the first to advertise on Facebook or Instagram, whatever it might be. Many of those marketers have never had to really build strategy or to build the systems that support scale and growth. And as I worked with larger and more successful companies, I realized that they weren't chasing these growth hacks. They weren't trying to outsmart the algorithm. Instead, they were really building systems and processes founded in strategy. And that was the key to real success and real growth for them. And so that's where I really try to help businesses focus today.
It's crazy the amount of tools that are out there. One of the things when we go through our sales process for my company is, so we're an outsourced SDR agency. And if a company is going to do that in-house, they need to evaluate which tools they want to bring on, right? You can't just do one data provider. You might need multiple, or you might need a dialer. It's like, who's taking the time to evaluate all the different tools and technology out there? Because I know when we do it, it's a lot of work. You're constantly evaluating throughout the year. And it's like, you could make a big mistake, whether it just doesn't work or it's expensive, or you buy it and then this is a common mistake. You buy it and no one actually owns it. So it ends up sitting there, and it's an expensive platform and no one's actually owning it. And so it's not getting used to its maximum capacity.
One of the ways that we try to mitigate against that is we talk about process first and then tools second, because once you know your process, you can bring in the tools that accelerate it. But oftentimes people get enamored with this tool that makes this promise, and then they try to build a process around that. And that usually doesn't really work.
So now, talking about Modern Revenue Strategies, how long ago did you start that?
So we've actually been servicing clients for more than 10 years just in that business. It has evolved, though, quite a bit. So I was working for larger companies and more sort of corporate type roles, while at the same time working with clients as a consultant. And then a few years back, I noticed a number of kind of converging trends in the B2B SaaS space. The private equity and VC companies would give these B2B SaaS companies more money for every new subscriber they got, whether they made money off of those subscribers or not, no matter how much their customer acquisition cost was. So it led to this sort of growth at all costs mindset, which was really unsustainable. And as soon as interest rates changed just a little bit, kind of turned that whole industry on its ear. And then McKinsey says that the pandemic lockdowns accelerated some trends in marketing and sales by more than 10 years in less than 10 months. We got a decade's worth of change in less than a year. So looking at some of those trends and then other things that I was seeing, I actually published a book a few years ago that went to #1 in 10 plus categories on Amazon, but it's all about how to build those systems and processes based in strategy, not chasing growth hacks, not, trying to just outsmart the algorithm. And I really have used that book to sort of take the frameworks that I developed and then bring that in helping businesses.
One of the most important things about building an internal process, such as a sales process, is it's there regardless of who you have running it. Meaning, if your sales leader, let's say, has a tragic accident or whatever the case may be, gets another job or starts their own company, that you still have the process. Someone can come in, they can then, may take them a little bit of time to understand everything, but then they can start following that process and they're not having to recreate something from scratch. And I will say it's one of the more challenging things to do, to constantly keep up with processes, because, hey, you implement that new tool, guess what? The process changed. So who's updating that? But it is very important, because that new person that comes in can now follow that process. Or if someone ever wants to look into buying your company, they're going to want to know what processes are in place. Very important.
Absolutely right. And the other thing that I find too is that, we have a phrase that, B2B systems set you free. Because a lot of people think, if I have all this overhead process, it's going to be restrictive. But it actually is very freeing, because it ensures that you always show up as your best self. So if you're tired or distracted or whatever, but you have a process to follow, it ensures that you do all of those best things. Versus if you're kind of winging it every time, you're almost definitely going to forget some of those crucial steps along the way, or at least not perform them as well as you could if you had that process. Mm-hmm. And then that creates the baseline upon which you can improve. It doesn't mean you can't get creative within the process. You can, have the opportunity to make inflection points. We recommend, like, every 90 days, think about, hey, have we learned anything in the last 90 days to make this process better? Is there a new tool that we should integrate? Is there a new way to say this script that we've been using that can make it work better? And so it really creates a lot more freedom and even better collaboration, because once it's a process, people can get shoulder to shoulder and collaborate on how to improve that process. Where if it's my way versus your way, then we start to get in this, sort of anti-collaborative environment.
And if you're trying to get your team, I'm just speaking to the audience here, if you're trying to get your team to document processes, one thing that I found helpful and that we do internally is I tell them, look, it's never going to be 100% perfect like a manual, because the processes are always changing as things change with the company, in your control or outside your control. Maybe a new position's created, maybe you implement a new technology, maybe there's a new service. So it's never going to be perfect, but the closest you can get there, the easier it will be to do exactly what you're talking about. And it's a better mindset than just thinking it's never going to be a finished product, right? But it's better than doing nothing, right? Otherwise, someone comes on board and they don't know what they're looking at. So yeah, easier said than done, but definitely worth getting your team in the habit. So now, give us a sense, like how many clients are you working with now? I see you're a fractional chief revenue officer. Give us a sense of how many companies, more or less, and then do they fall into a certain type of bucket, like a company size, SaaS? Give us a sense on the types of clients you're working with.
This episode is sponsored by Level Up Leads, a B2B sales development and appointment setting agency. Companies always need pipeline, but they oftentimes don't want to hire SDRs internally. The whole process is risky and expensive. You've got hiring costs, onboarding, training, additional spend on your tech stack, a few months to ramp up. And with that being said, SDRs are a high turnover position, and the person you hire might not necessarily work out, so you need to start all over again. That's why companies outsource this. Level Up Leads allocates a team of people, their tech stack, so you can onboard and launch your campaigns in about a week. They set qualified meetings in your calendar so your team has more selling opportunities. Visit levelupleads.io today to learn more. All right, now back to the show.
So I'm generally working with somewhere between 5 and 10 at any given time. And that varies kind of based on what we do. So I actually do some work with a startup incubator. There's a incubator out of Boston called Prepare for VC. And I met the sort of leader of that group. And he was like, man, I love the way that you approach kind of building marketing systems. But, most of these founders, they don't have the resources to do that over the time frame that a normal company would spend to really do it right. And so I actually built some AI tools and some training that allows us to deliver what might cost tens of thousands of dollars and many weeks or months to do with a larger company. We can do in 6 really discrete modules for those startup founders and really help them get very crisp on what's their marketing strategy and sales strategy so that they can then do a better job of delegating to other folks within the company, so they can do a better job of raising investor rounds and really communicating their value, and even so they can do a better job of having clarity instead of lots of ideas floating around. It really helps create this focus. But so sometimes I'll do a cohort of multiple companies going through that training at any given time. But most of my work is focused on really working with companies to sort of solve these problems and then activate it in the marketplace. And so we start with the strategy because I think it was Abraham Lincoln that said if he had an hour to cut down a tree, he'd spend 50 minutes sharpening the axe. And we really see strategy as that sharpening the axe by really understanding the customer, the competitive landscape, your company's unique differentiation. That's how you get the messaging that's going to be really powerful in the marketplace. Before we go out and start doing stuff with average messaging, first we make the messaging really powerful. That's that strategy piece. And then we build the processes so that we can take that messaging to the marketplace in an efficient and effective and scalable way. And so it a lot of times comes from really that understanding of the market landscape and your unique capability, which uncovers unique components of that buyer's journey, which gives us unique opportunities to impact their decision-making process.
So would you say a lot of the companies you step in and help out on a fractional basis, do they typically not have their ICP pinned down? Do you need to typically come in and help them solve this and test a little bit?
They all think they do. And the truth of the matter is, I do podcast guesting and stuff quite a bit. And I can't tell you, it is the most common theme among other marketers or sales experts like yourself, that if companies just took the time to better understand their ICP, the buyer personas, the buyer's journey, and not just the sort of descriptive aspects of it, but the real psychological unpacking of what are the real motivations, what are the real emotional components connected with this problem that they're trying to solve. That understanding unlocks so much. And so, although many times companies have written down an ICP, way too often it's everyone with a checkbook. We serve companies in North America that are trying to do a better job of selling. And so I will oftentimes discipline them to say, if they've got a couple years worth of time, let's look at everyone that spent any money with you for the last 2 years. Let's look at that 20% of customers that represented 80% of your revenues. Let's find the commonalities between those customers and between the context that drove them to market looking for you and the ones that you really love to serve. Let's make another, sort of understanding of what makes them different, what makes them valuable. And then by taking that messaging to the marketplace, it resonates a lot stronger. They can spend a tenth of the same amount of ad budget and get even better results because it's just so much more powerful. And so I always ensure that they've got that in place. The other thing that I find that companies very frequently do is they fail to look through the lens of the competitive landscape. And they, sort of say, well, here's what makes us powerful and this is what our customers care about. So let's do that. But then they wind up, talking about the benefits of the category, not the benefits of their unique solution or differentiating themselves from other solutions. I've even worked with clients that they did a great job of getting their clients to go to RFP, and then they never won those RFPs because they didn't know what made them unique. They just knew what was valuable about the category that they were in, and they did a very aggressive job of getting people in the prospects field to think about a solution like theirs, but then they didn't wind up closing those. And so by doing a better job of understanding that competitive landscape, they could then start to really differentiate and prove out why they were a unique approach.
Going back to what you said about the people, the companies you work with, they think they know their ICP really resonates with me, because we onboard clients. They obviously need help in some way. Otherwise, they wouldn't be outsourcing SDRs for sales development and appointment setting. And more times than not, it's the same thing. They don't know their ICP, or we have a form that they fill out, and it's like listing all the C-level execs, all these different industries. And they're like, hey, look, we can't start like this. We got to narrow this down. Like, have you done any testing? Okay. Like the things you mentioned, who are your past customers? Things like that. And one other thing we try to tell them, if they're a little unsure, or maybe they've never done outbound before, because it's true, a lot of the clients we work with, they still aren't sure, though some are very upfront about this, is I say, let's do cold calling and let's ask them, hey, why are you working with a competitor? Why did you resign? What do you wish they had? And then you can bring that back to the table, and then you can potentially implement that, or at least have rebuttals around it. That's some of the things we face when we work with new clients as well. You've been in the space for a long time, right? More than most. You're working with, you've kind of seen what's worked in the past. You're working with companies now to see what's working current. What are some of the things you've seen change over, let's just say, the past 10 years in the go-to-market or sales space?
Well, I mean, no one used the term go-to-market 10 years ago. Even that. And it's funny. I would say that 10 years ago, a lot of what we considered to be just the difference between doing it well versus just kind of doing it. Now there's names around it. And for example, go-to-market is a prime example. It used to be that a really good marketing leader was someone that thought not only about how do I attract the right prospects, but also how do I make sure that those are actually closing deals? And also, how do I make sure that they're actually the folks that are renewing and expanding and advocating for us in the marketplace, so that there's this kind of holistic approach. And that 10 years ago was just considered really good marketing. Now it's a go-to-market strategy because it sort of hits across all three. But I think that rigor and those expanding definitions have led to more emphasis on what it is that makes that particularly good and how to create collaboration across. And then, the RevOps and, sort of the ad tech, MarTech evolution that, it's just so fundamental to how you approach, building processes, is that you're going to be using technology, you're going to be bringing in data. And so, it's really sort of like that mindset of, process first. Whereas even 10 years, and although it's still very prevalent today, heroics was really the path to growth. You hired a superstar, and then oftentimes those people were superstars because they knew how to build a process. And so then they would come in and build a process for you. Whereas now there's a little bit more of an understanding that you need that process. You can't just hire a superstar and hope that they'll deliver against it. And so that's been a real change. And then, I mean, the other thing is, as you and I have, alluded to before, is just the pace of change. And that's why you have to really focus on strategy, because that determines where you need to go and keeps you from getting distracted by all of these other things that may or may not really create, incremental and sort of meaningful impact, or really transformational impact, not just incremental impact. It's that ability to really build a strategy and then focus on that, and then to think through the lens of process, so that you can bring in the tools to plug into a process.
Is there any particular channels you've seen work better in the past versus in today's market? What would you say some of the changes, I'm talking specifically channels, outbound channels, how has that changed, say, 5 years ago to today?
I mean, I guess 5 years ago, we were right in the pandemic. Yeah, there's this sort of pendulum, the pendulum is always swinging, it's always changing. Mm-hmm. And one of the pendulums that I've seen change from a trend is kind of moving up into the pandemic. There was this, everything's virtual. We can do everything by Zoom. And then the pandemic really solidified that. And I actually see that now that pendulum's starting to swing back. And so
I agree.
people value at least the ability to sit across the table from you, whether they do it very often or not. Just the ability that, well, I could meet with you in person changes the nature of the relationship quite a bit. And I think that the sort of acceleration of AI generation or generated content is going to magnify that even more, because it's going to mean that there's so much noise that the ability to filter that noise out by who can I meet with in person is actually going to be a lot more valuable than it was, last year, year before. So I'm seeing a lot more of that importance of live and even importance of sort of proximity, of building that authenticity that comes from it.
I 100% agree. Before the pandemic, it was a lot of email, a lot of LinkedIn was working, but as the AI started to pick up, so did that type of outreach. And so it was going for a while, but now it's a much harder channel, both of them.
So I'm curious, what are you seeing that's working, since in the role that you guys do of sort of building out these lists, you probably have a really good finger on that pulse.
Cold calling. And the reason why is because AI can't cold call. So it's illegal in the United States. So now there's different ways you can use it more on an inbound aspect, and there's use cases there. But obviously, not everyone's going to be picking up the phones. So we suggest multi-channel, so you layer in the different channels. But as I mentioned earlier, you can talk to somebody. Doesn't mean you're always going to make the sale or set the meeting right there, but you can learn, and people are going to have a genuine conversation with you. And that's going to be a lot more memorable than an email that comes into your inbox and might get looked at. And so that, and then also I think, as you mentioned, being in person, so conferences, even though they're not as cost effective, I think that just meeting someone in person is more memorable and just goes a lot further. So those are the two channels we're seeing working right now.
That makes a lot of sense. That definitely resonates with what I see.
So now if someone were to, I don't know if you have a full plate or not, but what would make someone a good type of company, a good candidate to work with you?
I typically work best with folks that have a growth mindset. Like they believe that change and things can stimulate growth. And I usually work well with companies that have been growing quickly. And you've probably seen this yourself. Someone works in an industry for a while. They have an idea for a better mousetrap, so they go found a company to create that mousetrap. And they know what's right about it because they just built it. And they know what's wrong about the competition because they used to work there. They have a big enough Rolodex or network that they can get some clients. And so they grow, but then they hit this revenue roadblock. And I oftentimes see that the first thing that they do is they go hire a sales leader and they say, be exactly like me and we'll double our revenues. But they haven't built any of the process necessary for that to be successful. So that doesn't work. And so they get their fingers singed a little. And then oftentimes they'll go to an agency. They'll spend some money, but they'll say the wrong things or to the wrong people or both. And that doesn't work because it's missing the strategy that it would need to be successful. And oftentimes that's a good inflection point for me to work with people because they've realized that there aren't simple, easy solutions. That in fact, they do need to invest in the strategy, and then they do need to invest in the process in order to reap the rewards and get those results. And I can come in on a fractional basis, and I'm not going to ask for any equity. I'm a lot less expensive than hiring a full-time person would be. The other thing is that marketing and sales leaders oftentimes have big personalities, and so they might make a big impact on your organizational culture that you might not necessarily want if what you really just need is the systems, processes, and strategies. And so that's a good inflection point for me to come in and help companies really build that. And then once they grow to a certain size, they can hire that full-time person, and that person's coming into a working structure that they can then really take to the next level instead of coming into a dumpster fire.
Is there any companies that wouldn't be a good fit, whether that be company size, revenue, or headcount, in particular industry, anything?
I don't do a lot with heavy manufacturing. Like I have done some work in that space, but that tends to be a kind of insular kind of industry. I tend to work more with B2B SaaS, but not the $20 a month SaaS, more of the $100,000 a year SaaS, and then professional services firms. But I am seeing that more and more professional services are building software to underpin those services, which then makes them more like a SaaS company. And so it's that inflection point. And then, as I mentioned to you before, I've started taking some of these same principles in marketing and sales and working with both CEOs that are getting ready to sell their company or exit planning advisors. And I've been working with a number of certified exit planning advisors through the Exit Planning Institute to take these same principles and apply it specifically to companies that are trying to build enterprise value, not just top line revenue, but really what I call sellable revenue. That's going to impact the multiple that they can get at sale and really sort of maximize that outcome.
All right. And where's the best place for people to find you?
So anyone that's listening that is interested in any of this, I'll give you a free copy of my book. You can get that at modernrevenuestrategies.com/free download. You'll get a full copy of the book with all the calculators and templates and everything you need to start implementing it in your business. And anyone that downloads a copy, you'll get an email from me. Or feel free to just shoot me an email directly. I'm Mark with a K at modernrevenuestrategies.com. And I'd be happy to connect with anyone and see if I can help them.
Well, thanks for coming on, Mark. I appreciate it. You dropped some pretty cool knowledge, specifically around process and different types of companies and their stages. So thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. Until next time.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.